many of the times as we try to step into the future, we're trying to find our own life by reputation, by comfort, by jobs, by identity, by purpose. And we will always lose it unless we try to lose it in Jesus first. Doing things our own way leads to disappointment. If you've never realized this before, especially without Jesus, when you're trying to do things your own way, which is not the Jesus way, it often and almost always leads to disappointment. The disciples partnered with Jesus for 3.5 years, feeding 5,000 people, really living shoulder to shoulder, knowing Jesus, hearing Jesus, sharing Jesus, going sent out 2 by 2. And yet when they're left to their own devices without a specific mission, they become like water. You know what I mean by that? Water follows the path of least resistance. And they just kind of go, well, I guess we'll go back to the way things were before. And when they do that, when they shrink back, they actually become hopeless and hungry. That's, I think, a theme here. They're kind of hopeless. Like, what do you want to do? You want to fish? Okay. And then they don't even catch any fish, the one thing that they want to do. Jesus, when he first meets them, says, stop fishing for fish, come fish for people. And they go, well, now that Jesus isn't here with us every day, let's go back and fish for fish. And so if you're honest, I'm going to ask another question. I promise it's not volunteering you to do anything. If you're honest, how many of us have ever gone back to old ways, old habits, old behaviors because we were just uncertain about what life was or what God was calling us to do? Anyone bold enough to raise your hand here? A few of you are up here, some of you are down here. Okay, there's a handful. If you're like, yeah, I am, but I don't want to raise my hand, I want to encourage you to find someone who did raise their hand and tell them your story, because this is pretty common to all of us. A lot of us struggle with this level of uncertainty. We want Jesus to take the wheel until he starts driving to a place we don't want to go. And then we grab the wheel back. We want Jesus to go someplace until finally he's like, whoa, 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 you're going there way too fast. I did not sign up for this. Or if you're like me, Jesus, you're not going fast enough, and you slam on the gas. That's how I am. Or you're like, Jesus, wherever we're going is causing too much pain, too much hurt, too much difficulty. I just want to have control. But every time we grab the wheel back, it always leads to weariness and frustration and irritation. And we always end up with empty nets because we're doing things our own way. And so if you've ever found yourself there, maybe you've asked these questions. I know I have. Is, God, why can't I catch any fish? Why can't I do the things that I want to do the things I like to do? For me, it was, why can't I do the things that I like doing and enjoy doing? Why do I, A, have no skill in doing it? And B, why am I not being fruitful? If you've ever found yourself there, the most dangerous question and the best question you can ask yourself is, God, what is wrong with me? If you ever ask yourself that question, great. If you haven't, ask it. God, what's wrong with me? What am I doing wrong here? Because Jesus, I believe, will reveal maybe it's your pride, your control, your inability to surrender. Because Jesus, once we meet him, doesn't want us to go back to the BC days. I've used this before. That's the before Christ days. Our before Christ values, our before Christ worldview, our before Christ habits. He doesn't want us to go back. He wants fresh obedience. That's our next point. Jesus invites us to follow him with fresh obedience. Jesus invites us to follow him with fresh obedience. And when the disciples follow Jesus, even though they do something ridiculous and put nets literally 8 feet on the other side of the boat. Richard talked about how crazy that is and that Jesus probably had a sense of humor. Literally, there's no reason why putting the nets here versus here would yield any fish. Like, that's 8 feet. It's not like the fish were like, oh, we're hiding all over here. It's not like the disciples even knew that was Jesus. It says they didn't know what was him. A man 100 yards away on the shoreline during the morning time should not have been able to have any advice that would ever help them out there, and yet they were willing to receive instruction. And they caught 153 large fish. I think we need to also be willing to have that kind of fresh obedience and saying, I'm not sure, God, what you're up to. This doesn't make any sense, but I guess I'll try something different because trying things my own way isn't working out for me. And I think this teaches us a kingdom principle, which is that immediate obedience produces unforeseen fruit. Sometimes we don't like the immediate obedience. We're like, all right, God, I'll follow you tomorrow or the next week or next year. But immediate obedience always produces fruit, even if we can't see it. For me, immediate obedience was going 8,000 miles away from my family and 3 little ones to go someplace that I had no business going. And not only was it we able to see God's power on display, but it was also on display through me as well. And it was really radical ways. For my wife, Sasha, when we first got married, about 1.5 years into our marriage, she was like, hey, I think God's telling me to quit my job. And I'm like, I'm not sure that's God, right? Because we were planting a church. She had just a job she had loved, and she was getting ready to quit it. And I'm like, okay, like if you want to, honey, I'm going to trust you. But this is a little bit crazy because this is the exact wrong time to do all this. Yet only a few, maybe weeks later, we found out that even after the doctor told her she couldn't conceive, we were able to conceive our very first son. And so it's kind of like, all right, God, maybe you actually are doing something. Maybe obedience matters, right? I know another story of someone who had a dream or a vision to see the entire Northeast reach for Jesus with teenagers. And their story was, I'm going to leave my home, my family in Southeast California where it's warm and nice, and go to an area where there's no family, no friends, the DC area. Like, who wants to move from California to DC, really? Some of you are like, I did it, I regret it. No, and yet somehow they ended up as the youth pastor of a church that believes that, oh wow, what a coincidence. A crazy coincidence. A youth pastor of a church that believes that a movement can happen in the DC area. Like, that's what immediate obedience looks like. But yet we struggle because we're like, man, I have to live and give everything up. But when we follow God, we see this unforeseen fruit. When I was in India, one of the leaders I met with of this huge movement that's been reaching over 1 million people said that a lot of times the people, pastors, leaders, struggle because we want to follow the way things God has done it in the past or the way God has worked for others, but we're not willing to have fresh obedience. And I think that's what Jesus is testing his disciples here. I think if they would say, no, we're too self-reliant, no, we're gonna trust our own selves, no, we're gonna keep on fishing and pick ourselves up by our bootstraps, I think Jesus would have said, maybe you can't meet me on the mountaintop. I don't know if Jesus would have said that. But because they were willing to be risky and willing to say, hey, maybe that guy on the shoreline is up to something, willing to push away their fear, they were able to then follow Jesus and do new things. And so next point is when Jesus gives us the direction, we never need to fear. I think the disciples could have been afraid. And I think the reason why many of us don't ask Jesus for direction in our life is because we are afraid. Like, I'm afraid God will actually say something. I'm afraid what he will say is going to be something I don't want to do, and it's going to cost me something that I don't want to pay. And so we don't ever have that. And we're like, Tim, maybe you're like this afterwards, Tim, I would love to follow Jesus, but what he's calling me to do isn't simply putting my nets from here to here. He's calling me to give up something greater. For me, one of my pivotal moments in my life was when I felt like Jesus was telling me, you need to pray for this homeless guy in front of your fraternity brothers. And I was like, God, I'm not quite sure you know what this is going to cost me. I don't think my fraternity brothers are going to like this. I think I'm going to lose my reputation. And I think Jesus was like, yep, that's what it's going to cost. And I was like, I'm not sure I want to do that. For others, it might be moving. It might be moving churches or houses or homes or jobs. And we're like, yeah, God, I'm kind of comfortable here. But we should never be afraid by following Jesus because his way is always better. For others, immediate obedience might be losing our purpose or losing our identity because it's wrapped up in our job. But our purpose and our identity never should be wrapped up in what we do. It's wrapped into who God is and who he created us to be. Matthew 10:39, one of my favorite verses, talks about those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for the sake of Jesus will find it. Too many of the times as we try to step into the future, we're trying to find our own life by reputation, by comfort, by jobs, by identity, by purpose, and we will always lose it unless we try to lose it in Jesus first. And so I want to here to say that God is still the same no matter what path he has us on. He's still our Father. If we believe in him, we're still his children, and we still have the same mission to make disciples, but sometimes the strategy, sometimes the faith looks differently. Sometimes God commands us to listen, to adapt, and to move in ways we've never done before because he wants us to trust him and trust his heart. So a real quick story, another story from my time. While I had a layover in Dubai, me and one of the elders from our church had an opportunity to meet with a missionary from the Middle East. He's stationed in Dubai, and he told us a story about how he went to Pakistan. There's a small indigenous movement beginning there, and some tribal leaders sat down with him and said, hey, we want you to teach us this training. And so he left and came back, and he came with a couple people, and he had resources and PowerPoints and books. I don't know if he had all that stuff. He had everything, some of the best training he ever could have. But before they decided to do this training, the next time he went back, there's about 7 of them. They prayed, God, what do you want us to do at this time? Before we do this training, before we worship and eat good food, what do you want us to do? And 5 out of the 7 people in the room felt like God said, wash each other's feet. Now, the Pakistani people were like, no way, you are not washing our feet. There's too much honor here. There's too much cultural issues. And so people fought and they pushed back, and it was not a good thing. And then they prayed and worshiped a little bit more. And finally they said, you know what? All right, if Jesus really wants us to wash feet, I guess we will. And so they said it was one of the best times they've ever had. One of the best trainings they ever had was praying and washing each other's feet. And the indigenous leaders left there that day saying, I think this is what God wants us to do in our communities. And they started going door to door, knocking on people's houses in these Pakistani villages, going, hey, can we wash your feet? And it was so crazy, so out there. People in these villages were actually letting them in. And as they're washing their feet, they're telling them the story of Jesus. So now there's actually this small movement happening in some remote areas of Pakistan where people are coming to faith because these missionaries were crazy enough to not teach them anything, but to wash feet. So this is some crazy stuff out there, but that's the kind of fresh obedience I think God's calling us to. That fresh obedience we can see movement happen. Now, some of us are probably like, man, I have just disobeyed God so many times. I've never let God tell me yes or no. How do I wrestle with it? How do I be restored? Well, I'm grateful you asked. We're going to go to John 21, verses 15 to 19. Here we see Peter restored. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again, Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The third time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all these things. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said these things to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me.